Bjarke Ingels. To those of you who are students here at Cooper Union, Bjarke needs no introduction. And I think many of the rest of you will have also heard of him or seen his work here in New York. He's, as many of you know, he's working on an extraordinary housing development on the West 57th Street, and upcoming projects just here in Manhattan also involve probably at least two other projects, one colloquially known as the Dry Line, or a storm defense system intended to protect Manhattan from the coming of a second Sandy, but also to create a new park that will stretch along much of its coastline, and other projects that are, I think, still in the pipeline and have only been rumored so far. But I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that he's transforming the shape of New York as we know it today. And that's just here in New York, and elsewhere he's also working on a major, extraordinary new, almost sci-fi project for the Google campus in Palo Alto, and countless other projects all over the world, and all of that by age 40, so one can only imagine what he'll be doing in the coming years. And so I wrote to Bjarke and I said, like, if you could choose anybody in the world you'd like to have a conversation with today at Idea City, who would that be? And I didn't hear back from him for a few days, then a week passed, then a couple of weeks, and then suddenly in the middle of the night I got a text message, and he said, Kim Stanley Robinson. That was just the 3 words, and I was kind of like, I kind of almost forgotten about it then, and then suddenly I realized what a logical choice this is. I think if you look at a lot of the innovations happening, especially in the field of technology today, you increasingly realize that actually what is happening is that certain brilliant minds, brilliant doers, makers, are reading science fiction novels and actually just taking them not as some sort of imaginary map of some imaginary distant reality, but actually taking them as a kind of a manual for how to shape the city of the future, the world of the future that we'll inhabit. So Kim Stanley Robinson is a logical choice for Bjarke in that he has been, since 1993, between 1993 and 1999, he wrote 3 novels that really redefined the genre of science fiction. The Mars trilogy, as they're known, was really considered by scientists, among others, to really be a roadmap towards the colonization of Mars. So I'd like to welcome to the stage these 2 extraordinary figures, and I can't wait to hear what them tell us about the future that awaits us, essentially. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So maybe I should, thanks for coming to New York, Stan.
A real pleasure.
Maybe I need to justify why, I mean, although Joseph did a good job, why an architect would be so inspired by a writer, and especially a science fiction writer. And I know that you wrote your thesis on Philip K. Dick, and I quite often use one of Philip K. Dick's definitions of science fiction as a reason why anyone should be interested in science fiction, which is that he wrote, and I might misquote it slightly, but the spirit is, he wrote that science fiction is not a space opera, although it often takes place in space. It's not a story from the future, although it often takes place in the future. But science fiction is a literary genre where the plot is triggered by some form of innovation. And this innovation is often technological, but it can also be social, political, cultural, biological, whatever, but it basically takes the world as we know it, changes one important fact or factor, and then the whole novel becomes a narrative exploration of the potential of that idea, the consequences, the cascading consequences, the side effects, the conflicts, the possibilities that erupt from this one changed factor. Just like, in my mind, like almost all aspects of life, but especially in design, when you're doing something, when you're trying to design a building or a city or whatever, you try to look for things that might have changed or that could change. And then once you try to alter that one variable, the whole design process becomes a design exploration of the potential of that change. Then also, I normally explain that to people that don't know what architecture or design is, that at the core of it, it is the art and science of turning fiction into fact. That you spend a lot of time solving problems, getting permits, etc. And then once you're done, suddenly what started out as a wild idea is now concrete reality, and it is simply the world as we know it. So in that sense, that there's often this amazing potential in finding fictions that you would want to see turned into fact. And then maybe just before I hand it over to you with a serious question, we found a video, because like the other day I stumbled upon a video that this Swedish amateur animator did that is actually, it's a 3-minute film that realizes and visualizes a lot of the ideas that Stan has brought forward in his books. And I think it's a pretty good example of a series of fictions that I would love to see turned into fact. Could you maybe just show the video?
I've been writing about the solar system for about 35 years.
For all its material advantages, the sedentary life has left us edgy, unfulfilled. Even after 400 generations in villages and cities, we haven't forgotten. The open road still softly calls, like a nearly forgotten song of childhood.
So these are the sports that I've invented for us to do in the solar system, or various habitats. Mostly out of the Mars books, or 2312, and the whole body of science fiction.
We invest far-off places with a certain romance. The appeal, I suspect, has been meticulously crafted by natural selection as an essential element in our survival.
That's Enceladus.
Long summers, mild winters, rich harvests, plentiful game. None of them lasts forever. Your
Any
own
wave
life,
is going to be
or your
surfed.
bands, or even your species might be owed to a restless few, drawn by a craving they can hardly articulate or understand, to undiscovered lands and new worlds.
Space elevators. It really reduced the cost. And this is Mars.
Herman Melville in Moby Dick spoke for wanderers in all epochs and meridians. He said, "I am tormented with an everlasting itch for things remote. I love to sail forbidden seas."
The interior of asteroids. That must be Europa.
Maybe it's a little early. Maybe the time is not quite yet. But those other worlds, promising untold opportunities, beckon. Silently, they orbit the sun, waiting.
Thanks. So what's kind of interesting, like you mentioned, because of course one of the first frontiers of space exploration is, today people happily go, up into sort of 3-4 miles of height to places where you basically can't really survive without assistance on planet Earth. And these are just like some examples of space tourism when that becomes an option.
Yes, but I want to, especially for people who aren't familiar with my work, to assert that I am a realist, and I come from California, and therefore, looking at the world today, I see the world that we live in as a kind of large science fiction novel that we're all writing together, because all these innovations are coming and happening so fast that, in effect, we're already in a science fiction novel and always will be. So to write science fiction is to do a kind of realism. And just like your quote from Philip K. Dick was very apt, because you change one thing and you can follow the ramifications out into a scenario. And it's not really predicting the future, but just expressing what might happen from the things that we're doing now. And then they recombine with each other and make a story. And then I guess the other thing I'd want to say is that you do the hard part. Like Bjarke talked about turning fictions into fact. And to me, we do that all the time, but that's actually very hard to accomplish in the real world. And I do like the opposite. I turn fact, which is our current reality, very science fictional, into fictions to try to tell stories of where we might go and how it might work. And ultimately, when Bjarke and I met, what I saw in his work, and he said something like, anytime you confront a dilemma, always say yes. And so there was this kind of utopian coping with the situation at hand and making the best of it. There was a kind of joyfulness, even in the kind of emergency century that we're entering, with all of the climate change problems and all of the problems that we face. Nevertheless, you design your way out of it by coping with it as best you can. And it isn't just disaster maintenance, it's actually growth into something that could be quite magnificent. So I do the easy part. I look at the situation and say, well, it could be so great. Let's build a city on Mars in which they, go down a mile inside a cylinder and that way they stay warm, or build inside a crater on top of Olympus Mons, and I can just say, make it so, or I can write the sentences. Actually turning it into real structures in the real world, I'm enormously impressed by, because I think that's the hard part.
It's like actually like those things about Mars. The funny thing, the first time I got Red Mars in my hands and started reading it, I was actually on a ship on an expedition in the northeast of Greenland, which is it's a huge nature park. It's an extremely harsh climate. By law, you're not allowed to get off the boat without wearing a survival suit. You don't need oxygen, but everything else, like you will die if you drop in the water. You have to actually carry a rifle with these like huge cartridges that are like bear cartridges, because there's polar bears. And I was on a boat with scientists and artists, almost like the first 100 colonizers of Mars in Red Mars, which is like a group of scientists. And it felt incredibly relevant to my current situation. And then I started reading about how the whole story about Mars is quite useful for the current setting. We also have the EU Commissioner for the Environment here in the room. And the interesting thing about what happens in Red Mars, Green Mars, and Blue Mars is that they actually talk about stewardship of a planet as something proactive. For instance, the preservationists, they want to keep Mars as uninhabitable, like the way we found it. Whereas the terraformers, they want to create global warming because Mars is very cold. They want to pollute the atmosphere with CO2 and other gases, of course, a lot of oxygen and nitrogen, to make the air breathable. They want to bring invasive species from planet Earth that can start creating a biosphere. So it's almost like turning the whole idea of global warming and all the environmental challenges we're facing now on planet Earth inside out, and it becomes like this proactive issue.
Well, it's worked ever since I wrote these books that it's a kind of a funhouse mirror reflection of what we have to do here. In both cases, we are stuck with planetary management, and management is maybe the wrong word because we don't know enough to do it well. We don't have that much power. If we push Earth's environment past certain tipping points of ocean salinity or average temperature, things will spiral quickly out of any possibility of us coming back from that. We don't have that much power. So it's not geoengineering, which implies more control than we have. It's more like geofinessing, where we hope to tweak things in the right direction and avoid doing bad things in the first place. So I like that the Mars books serve as a thought experiment where you think about on Mars, it's terraforming. On Earth, we call it geoengineering because it's too painful of a joke to talk about terraforming Earth. But the issues are the same. We have an impact on the climate. We have an impact on the environment. We need to make a stable civilization. We need to be in a stable balance with the planetary systems, the flows of energy, the ability to get rid of wastes. All these things have to be put into a long-term balance, and if they aren't, none of these space dreams of enjoying the solar system, our local neighborhood, will come to pass, and they'll be rendered irrelevant. It's important, I think, coming from my perspective, to insist that Earth is the permanent center of the story. There's no planet B. Mars won't do us any good unless Earth is in a stable long-term balance, because the project of inhabiting Mars in the solar system will take either centuries or thousands of years. So the timescales are grotesquely off. We have an emergency that is hitting us in the next few years and decades, and a potential that extends off beyond that. If we were to solve our problems here, then we could have quite an extraordinary time in our solar system, which is close enough to play around in and can be both useful and beautiful.
Because I also think it's kind of helpful when you see the monumental, almost like catastrophic scale of interventions that are necessary on Mars to start bringing it towards, trying to. There's this whole array of efforts, including creating these off-world solar focuses that sort of create these hot beams that sort of emit tons of matter and CO2 into the atmosphere. There's triggering volcanic eruptions. There's all kinds of elements of massive disastrous global warming. And when you think about all those things, and that's still to even make a narrative, the three books take place over a span of 100 or 150 years, simply because things work so incredibly slowly, which again reminds you how much easier it is to actually proactively take care of a planet that actually comes with a fully inhabitable ecosystem rather than making one in another location.
So true. Yes, well, now we've we started the Industrial Revolution with 280 parts per million of carbon dioxide. Now we're at 400. The effects are obvious. We can burn about 500 more gigatons of carbon and stay within that 2 degrees limit that scientists have declared might be safe and not spiral into disasters. But we've identified 2,500 gigatons of fossil carbon already. And so that means that there's about 2,000 gigatons of fossil carbon that are stranded assets that we have to not burn. And it's worth about $1,600 trillion at current prices. So there are people on this planet that are going to want to burn that. They are going to be careless of the consequences. They're going to convince themselves that it's okay. And the rest of us are going to have to insist that we not burn 4/5 of the carbon that we've identified. Well, this is alarming, and I think we need the tools of thought, and we need post-capitalism. We need a way to price properly the negative externalities, as economists used to put it, because those aren't externalities, those are internalities, and we're really just deferring these costs onto future generations, but they pay a horrible price compared to the price that we would pay. So the president of the World Bank said last year, we need to put a price on carbon. This was remarkable coming from the head of global capitalism, or one of the heads, that the market system doesn't work. It underprices things, and we're not paying the true cost. So here, the technology involved is economics and justice and language and the rule of law. These are all technologies as well as the machineries. And it's important to keep that in mind.
Maybe two things to that. I mean, I think what you're talking about, like the human element, that there's like too much temptation to this sort of short-sighted profit, or like even there's like a lot of disagreement. I think one of the things that's fascinating in the Mars trilogy is that you have a planet that is highly populated by basically scientists and engineers, so people that really know how to act, people that have the skills and the tools and the technology and the ability to act and solve resolutely and do what's necessary. But then when it comes to, at some point, without spoiling too much, Mars acquires independence from Earth. Any colony always ends up rebelling against the sort of the old world. So, and in this case, they have to find out what's going to be the political system. And for me, I was actually, I was having a hard time coming through. It's like almost like a major part of book 2 is like these endless quarrels about which sort of political system to implement, which ideology.
Yeah.
And it was like driving me nuts that all of these people that had like amazing capacity to act were completely numbed by their like annoying disagreements.
Well, as I said, I am a realist, and people are never going to agree about these things, and that's really what politics is. You need working majorities of 51% or 55% or 60%. You're never going to get 100%, nor anything close. So you have to fight out all the details of these things, and there's lots of different potential plans and lots of different ways of describing the issues involved, different economic systems, different social systems. You could say, going from global capitalism to global social democracy. I mean, if you could instantaneously enact the laws of Denmark internationally everywhere on Earth, that would be a big step in the right direction. And then further steps could follow from there. So this is a hard thing to argue in the United States, where we don't have a social democrat party, but what you can say is public utility districts, or you can say government of the people, by the people, and for the people, and speak out against oligarchy and wealth, and speak towards democratization of wealth and power. De-oligarchify, this is my current phrase. So these are still technical discussions, and they're going to cause endless arguments. And I do think that, given that that's true, maybe we should reel it back to design and to some of the things that you're doing. I mean, it was mentioned in the introduction, the so-called dry line, and I myself am really interested in hearing more about this, and I bet a lot of people are. It's more of a concept or a mystery to us now, and I wondered if you could tell us more.
But it actually falls quite nicely into this this balance that you always straddle in your narratives about, on one hand, the social political aspect, on the other hand, the sort of the hard science and the engineering. Because in the case of the dry line, like after Sandy, it became quite evident that with rising temperatures, the hurricane belt of the Atlantic has expanded both north and south, which means that suddenly states that aren't really used to like frequent and strong storms are suddenly getting them more and more frequently. And then it just so happens that the funnel shape of the New York Bight makes all of the east coast of the tri-state area function as a gigantic funnel that brings storm surge into the mouth of the Hudson River and basically puts 50% of the city at risk. So something needs to be done. And there we try to sort of, in a way, to combine the environmental engineering with the social engineering. And if you look at the New York City history, the development of New York City has been very much shaped by two giants, and the encounter between them, Robert Moses, the power broker, a public servant with sort of almost unlimited power, very top-down, often with devastating impact on the neighborhoods he intervened in, like necessary projects, but maybe very heavy-handed and very top-down. At some point, he tried to typically run a highway through Greenwich Village, and he encountered resistance from Jane Jacobs, who rallied the local grassroots and eventually in a sort of David Goliath moment of New York City development, defeated the plans and saved the village. So for the dry line, we thought that this needs to be almost like the love child of Robert Moses and Jane Jacobs. Like in a way, because to protect the city from storm surge, you need a holistic and contiguous approach of like 12 miles of contiguous waterfront protection. It's very, very heavy on engineering. It needs to be sort of coordinated collectively. But to make it urbanistically successful, it needs to happen in a close dialogue with the local communities. So it doesn't become a wall that segregates the life of the city from the water around it, but that it's actually welcomed. Because like when you have to make massive projects, you have to move a lot of soil, you have to like bring in a lot of steel. You can do it just as a single serving purpose of creating a dike and that's it. Or you can try to say that while we're doing it, why don't we ask everybody what are their greatest fears for this? What is their greatest concerns? What are their desires for the community? What's on their wish list? What would be amazing? And then try to see that while doing the protection, you can do it in such a way that it also becomes parks or landscapes or pavilions or etc. So it's in a way trying to bring the human element and the sort of the hard science element together in a form of synergy. Actually, I was thinking maybe there's an interesting, back to your point about capitalism and the alternate modes, that normally I say, as an architect, we are quite often up against the standard solution. And the standard solution is often serving a single criteria. And a typical example could be a sort of Robert Moses sort of public housing project, where you know you need X amounts of residential units. Maybe you want daylight from two sides, you need a minimum distance to the next building. There's a certain efficiency of an elevator that goes X amount of floors, then you know maybe you need another elevator, so you stop there. So in the end you end up having a slab, and then an offset, and then the next slab, and then an offset, and then the next slab. And it's serving that one criteria. So it's a standard solution that's perfect if you only look at that. But it doesn't say anything about life between the buildings, it doesn't say anything about diversity of households. It doesn't say anything about which programs are necessary to create a neighborhood that's active 24/7. It doesn't say anything about like the necessity of diversity, both you know ethnically, culturally, but also you know, economically. So, in a way, what we try to do quite often is to, because the standard solution is hard to avoid because it's so good at solving that one criteria. So our primary weapon when we try to design things is to add more criteria, to remind the decision makers that this is not enough. You also have to look at this, and you also have to look at this, and you have to look at this. And suddenly, by piling up concerns and demands and criteria, the standard solution doesn't work any longer, and you find more, you actually force the architecture out of the constraint and the straitjacket of the standard solution and into more sort of adventurous forms. And I think maybe back to your economical or capitalistic model, you're saying one of the problems of capitalism, I would say the beauty of capitalism is that it allows for the distribution of and the trade of services, that you don't have to shoot your own animals and sow your own plants and weave your own clothes. You can write books and you can do it beautifully, and then you can use the value created from your writing to eat and be clothed.
Yep.
So, but of course, it's just right now it's a quite primitive system.
Yeah.
And
right now it's quarterly profit and shareholder value, as if that were it. And so what if you added in the terms you're describing, and this is just what I was saying, you come to a dilemma and you say yes, and this is exactly what I think Bjarke is describing in a different way. What you add, I think, is full employment, adequacy for all, and this recent idea of Thomas Piketty, progressive taxation, not just on income, which is a great idea, but a progressive taxation on capital assets. A truly transformative single additive to the mix, because suddenly the public sphere and everybody begins to share the wealth. And the arguments against progressive taxation on capital assets are almost completely empty. The fulminations of the Wall Street Journal or The Economist against this idea of Piketty's were actually completely without content, because it's a very good idea with no good argument against it, except that the people who have these agglomerations of capital don't like the idea because it seems like it might reduce power. Beyond that, there's no good argument against it. And the fact that the rich might not like your idea is really not one of the most powerful arguments against it. So I think there are tweaks in our system, additions, new extra criteria. When added to it, you still would have trade. You still would even have a market. It wouldn't be a free market, but it's not a free market now. Carbon, for instance, is grotesquely subsidized, and if it weren't, it could be that solar and wind power already outcompeted. But we have a government that is maybe democratic or maybe bought, or maybe it's a battleground in between those situations, and we know that's the case. So there are fights to be had. What I find is impressive is in this incredibly conflicted, and you might even say locked moment of political battle, that you can still get things done in the real world. And I'm wondering, when you have ideas, when you have a project or a proposal, or someone comes to you with a question, what would you describe as the major resistance? If you could make a change to get more done as an architect and designer, what might that be? Or probably not just one thing, but
I think to at least have enough of the ear of the chief decision makers to be able to make an argument that goes, because I mean, I think any time you want to sort of not just reconfirm the status quo, but you need to dig a little bit deeper into the root causes, because quite often in architecture you're being asked to answer a very well-defined question. But if you have access to probing a little bit through analysis or through meetings and questions, and access to certain key experts within a certain field, when you can go slightly deeper, you can maybe say, okay, so maybe this doesn't necessarily have to be the question, because like, if you know why has the question been formulated like this, what are the root causes, what are the key criteria, and then you can somehow come back. Like for instance, so that's why quite often, if you only have access to the mid-management, it can be a little bit difficult, or very difficult, if not impossible, to change the game, or to reframe. Whereas if you really do get the access to the chief decision makers, you might be able to address the concerns and the core values with a completely unexpected answer. Like in a way, like I quite often compare a great idea to a good joke. And quite often we joke around in the studio as a working process, but that's because, similar to science fiction actually, the anatomy of a joke is that you have a build-up which sets you in a recognizable situation, and you kind of see where it's going, and then the punchline is completely unexpected but still makes perfect sense. Mm-hmm. And it's funny. It makes you laugh, and it's the same. So in a way, the joke reveals an alternate consequence, or an alternate reality within the reality that you already know and recognize. And it's the same like with a great idea, that you have a whole argument that builds up, describing and analyzing and dissecting the world as you know it, and then the answer is completely unexpected but makes perfect sense. And for instance, like one of I think the project that I pride myself in is probably the closest to science fiction that we have realized, or we're building right now, is that we're doing this waste-to-energy power plant in Copenhagen, where it's the biggest and tallest building in Copenhagen. It turns trash into district heating and electricity. There's a lot of good things about it, but the best thing about it is that it is completely non-toxic. It's the cleanest waste-to-energy power plant in the world. It emits steam and a small amount of CO2. the problem was, and we were invited for the competition, so why would they want to do anything but the business as usual? And the trick is that the CEO of the company, she's a strong believer in her industry and the technology that she's spearheading, but nobody can see that it's totally clean. On the contrary, like, it just looks like.
Right.
So when we proposed the idea to use the roofscape of the power plant to turn it into a public park where you can ski in the winter in Denmark, because we have snow but we don't have hills. Right. Suddenly, normally you would want to be as far away from a power plant as possible, because Yeah. But here you literally have clean mountain air on the roof of the power plant. So suddenly we made something blatantly visible. It's like a physical manifestation of something that would otherwise be invisible, almost like I know your last book is about shamanism. I like this about like shaman is that you take something from the spirit world and you manifest it into the physical world. That's almost what we're trying to do. We're taking the invisibility of the clean technology and making it evident that you have a ski slope on the roof of a power plant. And I think there it's just, we had a CEO who was aware of that she somehow had a strength in her product that was invisible, and by making it physically manifest, everybody could somehow sign up on this idea that would otherwise seem almost insane. When we proposed it, we were working on the competition, and I got a phone call from my CEO, and she was like, she was calling to like get me to calm the fuck down, because so Bjarke, this is a $1 billion project in our hometown. We would really want to win this. Don't screw it up with the stupid ski slope. What are you doing?
Yeah.
But I gave her the argument, and in the end she said, yeah, okay, like I'll take care of my side of the business, and you guys take care of yours. But it is somehow this idea that you need to somehow be able to tap into the bigger picture.
Oh yeah.
And I was a little bit interested in your cube monetary system. I don't know if it gets too complex.
Well, let me follow up though on what you're saying, because the general point I want to make out of that is that there's this surplus of joy or of inventiveness that, okay, it's a necessity that we clean up waste, and turning it into energy is like convergence, where all the systems of civilization feed into a big, larger cycle that works. And then the stylishness of that is part of the pleasure of it. So it's not like we need the power. There's so much waste in our technological base as it is right now that you can imagine us being a kind of a diffuse Chelyabinsk 56, the Stalinist city in the Urals. It's a pretty dirty tech that we've quickly gotten to in a kind of brutalist way. As you clean it up, it's not like you lose privileges, so that you can actually go to the young and you can say, it's not as if back in the, 1950s, we lived high on the hog, and now you have to be poor and live like saints because we destroyed the world. It's actually, it was a little bit stupid back then, and now clean style, stylishness, you can live better when you're more out in the world, less cocooned in crap, and you have a sweet technology that takes care of these problems in a cyclical way that you can pass on to the future generations. And so the ski slope on top is kind of the objective correlative of that, we would say in English classes. It lets you see the spirit involved of let's do this stuff joyfully, with the idea that we can, the utopian possibility is still there. 7 billion people can live on this planet in adequacy, stably, over the long haul, with really smart ag, really smart tech, really smart design. It is not at all physically impossible. It's politically difficult, and we have some bad infrastructure that has its own path dependencies that we have to work through, and we have to work through it really fast, because we're somewhat in a little bit of a long emergency, although that's a contradiction in terms. But we have to do it fast. So the more everybody gets on board with it, in terms of not just ideas or words like mine, but objects and structures and infrastructures like Bjarke's, that's where I think the convergence really comes together and is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I think also like this idea of like not being so wasteful, like, because of course like just the power plant, for instance, the scrubbers that extract CO2, they actually end up with a lot of CO2 that actually has a market value, because you can do stuff with it. So that you end up actually extracting a lot of resources that are actually like in their own right. They don't become pollution. They actually become a potential, and they even have the potential for profit. I was thinking like also maybe one of the reasons that I think looking towards again space and this idea of surviving in space, because of course there's the resources are so scarce that you need to make ecosystems
circular.
Yeah, so you need to retain the water by filtering it and bringing it back. You need to create these like loops. And I was thinking that I thought there was an interesting thought that when you're living on Mars, everybody is so basically dependent on those main utilities, power, oxygen, water, food, etc., that you can't actually survive as a homeless, because like you wouldn't be able to breathe, or you would freeze to death and starve. You can't be homeless. So therefore, somehow socialism or social democracy comes much more naturally in an environment where nobody can even question the basic needs as a birthright.
Yeah, I think this is then you think to yourself, but wait, Earth is also a spaceship. This spaceship Earth image from the 70s is a beautiful image and important. There are no negative externalities, and also there is no planet B that we can escape to if we wreck this one. So it all comes down to making the cycles work here. And a part of that would be one of the methods to make those cycles work is social justice itself. So you have food, water, shelter, clothing, healthcare, education, and the right to work for everybody. At that point, there isn't the wastefulness of the poor who have topsoil loss and deforestation because they need to feed their family that night, nor the wastefulness of the hyper-rich with just conspicuous consumption. There's like this group in Zurich called the 2000 Watt Society, just living off of 2,000 watts per year, and I don't want to get into what that measurement means, but because I don't understand it. But what it does mean is that that's the average amount of watts that everybody on the planet right now has. And this group in Switzerland has decided that you could live on the average of what the 7 billion have available right now in energy terms, be very comfortable. So that's the promise, I think, and I think we're running close to the end of our time here, so maybe it's a good place to end, but except I want to end with a thank you, not only for inviting me, but also for doing this work, because I now say, an ounce of law is worth 10,000 pounds of rhetoric, that I can write any kind of story you want, but getting things built in the real world is just really what we all need to do now. So it's a kind of an exemplary figure, and it's really a pleasure to watch your work and to talk with you here.
And I want to say, like, maybe since I still like being 40, and let's say if I retire at 80, I have 40 years to try to realize a few of your amazing fictions, and I would definitely love to do so.
Okay, I want to go body surfing in the rings of Saturn. If I have to pick one image, let's work on that one, okay? All right, thank you.
Thank you so much.